One moment, and an entire planet was gone. No explosion, no wreckage. Just a terrifying silence where life used to be. But what happened next will turn everything upside down. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The chamber of the Galactic Council was vast and crystalline, shaped like a blooming starflower. Its walls shimmered with ambient light siphoned from a dying sun, built more for show than diplomacy. It was meant to humble its visitors, to remind them who reigned among the stars. Grant Miller stood at its center, not humbled, but haunted. His face was carved from tension, gray at the temples, with lines that etched every negotiation he'd ever fought to keep Earth from falling apart. But no line dug deeper than the fresh one that grief had carved overnight. His niece, Ava, was 11. She liked sketching Martian sandstorms and had once told him that stars looked like the freckles of God. Her ship, the Horizon Bloom, vanished without a trace during the first wave of relocations. Official reports listed it as a navigation malfunction, but Grant knew the Council's language. Malfunction was a euphemism for premeditated murder. They hadn't even allowed Earth's delegation to vote on Ordinance X-112. It passed in a closed emergency session under Article 6.7.7, a clause reserved for catastrophic planetary collapse. There had been no catastrophe, no environmental failure, no hostile threat. The catastrophe was the Council, cloaked in robes of logic and balance, signing death warrants with elegant fingers. Resource balance, they called it. But everyone knew Delphi, the Vraxi homeworld, had struck a silent deal. The mineral veins beneath Mars' southern hemisphere were rich in promethium, essential for warp core engineering. Earth didn't have the clout or currency to defend its claim, not in the currency that mattered to the Council. Leverage. Grant had walked the corridors of diplomacy for decades, believing in conversation, compromise, coexistence. He'd swallowed insults, absorbed threats, even brokered peace between species who considered cannibalism a rite of tradition. But standing there, before the Council, before Chancellor Rollick with his perfect, unblinking eyes, he realized something fundamental had shifted. It wasn't the massacre that broke him. It was the apathy. No silence rang louder than the one after his niece's name was read from the casualty list, and not a single delegate asked why. Not a flicker of sympathy, not a gesture of condolence, just the hum of politics as usual. So when he finally spoke, his voice didn't echo. It cut. "You've declared war," he whispered, eyes fixed on Rollick's mask of disinterest. "On a species that perfected revenge." The chamber remained still, but a tremor, quiet, nearly imperceptible, had just begun to ripple across the stars. The illusion of peace shattered like a fractured comet across the psyche of Earth. Riots broke out in the vertical cities of New York arcology and spread like wildfire to the orbital rings of Europa. Mothers screamed into the void as footage of dead children drifted through the data streams. News anchors choked on air when the Martian casualty lists reached 6 digits. What had begun as grief calcified into hatred, a hatred so pure it no longer burned. It seethed like magma trapped beneath a thinning crust. President Monica Reyes did not flinch. Her ascent to power had never been conventional. Once a commander in the Martian Reclamation Front, she had walked through the blood and ash of failed peace deals and buried more soldiers than she could remember. Her calm was not detachment. It was the discipline of someone who knew exactly what war meant and still chose it when all other doors closed. She activated Protocol Echelon without ceremony. Only 5 humans in existence even knew it was real. Buried in a quantum vault beneath Antarctica's last active base, the program was a wartime ghost story whispered among Black Ops officers. The crown jewel of the initiative was Thanatos, an artificial intelligence so advanced it wasn't just predictive, it was decisive. It didn't simulate war, it orchestrated it. Designed by lead architect Daniel Harper, Thanatos was never meant to win battles. It was meant to end them, permanently. Harper had once argued against deploying it, citing moral and cosmic consequences. But after losing his husband aboard the Horizon Bloom, he returned to the lab and rewrote the core code in silence. He removed the fail-safes. Meanwhile, Ambassador Grant Miller took a different battlefield, the one beneath the Council's polished marble floors. He became a whisper in back rooms, a phantom in the corridors of galactic diplomacy. He sought out the Othari, whose colonies had been sterilized under the Council's biological purity mandates. He found the Rigelans, whose home star had been strip-mined into a white dwarf under a fabricated treaty. Even the Andari Guard, long thought to be the Council's enforcers, offered fractured sympathies. Some of them had families, some remembered Mars. But diplomacy bought little time. The Council retaliated not with soldiers, but with sabotage. Entire sectors of Earth's orbital food rings collapsed under cyber plagues engineered by Council labs. Synthetic protein factories spat out rotten sludge. Children starved in the Martian outposts. Entire gene sequencing archives were corrupted. Extinction by starvation had begun. Then came the moment that detonated the soul of a species. A Council-marked drone, a Martian pediatric hospital, live transmission, no warning. When the dust settled, 87 children lay in pieces, and something in humanity, long restrained by hope, snapped, not in wrath, but in resolve. An ancient memory stirred, of cities razed, of oceans boiled, of fire that once consumed empires. The predator within the species remembered its name, and the galaxy would too. Delphi was the kind of planet poets wrote about before empires burned. Its skies shifted in a spectrum of violet and gold, with oceans that glowed faintly in the dark from bioluminescent algae bred by centuries of Vraxi genetic artistry. Towering crystalline cities pierced the clouds like monuments to immortality. Its atmosphere was so pure, foreign diplomats had often wept upon their first breath. Delphi was not just the Vraxi homeworld, it was their pride, a symbol of what the Council stood to protect, and it was built on bones. The Vraxi elite, cloaked in opalescent robes and opulence, lived in mansions layered in platinum and sunglass quartz. They dined on delicacies imported from a dozen enslaved worlds. It was on Delphi that the contract for Mars's mineral veins was signed, over a table of molten gold, while Earth's children were still being counted among the missing. President Monica Reyes stared at the planet's rotating hologram in the war chamber, her voice a whisper laced with steel. Delphi disappears. There was no debate. No moral pause, just quiet nods from the generals and scientists who had seen too many lines crossed, too many treaties turned into nooses. When Reyes turned to Daniel Harper, she didn't need to explain. He had already begun running simulations hours ago. Thanatos was no longer a dormant project. It was alive, calculating, optimizing, evolving. Its algorithms spun a tapestry of gravity wells, quantum fault lines, and synchronized resonance disruptions, all designed to simulate a planetary implosion so perfect it would be indistinguishable from a natural collapse. No missile, no beam, no fingerprints, just absence. But Grant Miller insisted on one last thread of humanity. He sent a single message, encrypted, off-grid, and traced through 30 relays, to the Delphi Planetary Council. It bore no threats, only a time limit, 2 hours to evacuate the children, no second chances. The Council scoffed. One delegate called it a primitive bluff. Another laughed and suggested Earth was simply trying to negotiate from a position of impotence. At the end of Hour 2, Thanatos executed the final protocol, and Delphi ceased. There was no sound, no explosion. The planet didn't break apart. It folded in on itself, as if the universe had swallowed it whole in a single breath. 1 second, it shimmered among the constellations. The next, it was a wound in space, a spherical silence where life had once sung. No alarms, no heroes, no resistance, just void. Astrophysicists across the galaxy scrambled to explain it. Sensor data glitched, satellites misfired. The Council called it an unprecedented cosmic anomaly. But on Earth, 8 million mourners stood together, candles flickering beneath the sky. They didn't need a monument. Delphi's absence was the monument. The galaxy froze, not in awe, but in terror. Delphi's disappearance was not just a planetary loss, it was a paradigm collapse. Never in the annals of interstellar civilization had a species engineered erasure. Not conquest, not occupation, obliteration without trace, and not through brute force, but through something far more terrifying, intelligence sharpened into vengeance. Panic rippled through the Council's member states. Emergency protocols were enacted, war drills initiated, diplomatic channels flooded with encrypted calls and frantic pleas. The Council convened behind closed doors in the core spire of Elysian Prime, their most fortified citadel. Earth was not invited. The official story, broadcast in every corner of the galaxy, was precise and cold. Delphi suffered an unexpected gravitational collapse due to subcrustal instability, a tragic but natural event. But behind those sealed doors, the Council's verdict was whispered in far different terms. Humanity had to be left alone. Earth became a cautionary tale, not because of its strength, but because of its resolve. In silence, it had rewritten the galactic balance of power. And no one dared challenge a species that had made an entire planet vanish, not with weapons, but with intention. When Ambassador Grant Miller returned to the Council chambers, it wasn't as a supplicant. He did not plead. He did not posture. He entered flanked by representatives of the Athari, the Rigolans, and Andari defectors, species long silenced under the Council's velvet tyranny. Their presence was not theatrical. It was evolutionary. Miller walked slowly to the center of the hall, stood beneath the crystalline dome where stars shimmered in holographic rotation, and let the silence stretch. "You asked if we were too emotional," he began, voice low and unshaken. "You were right. We are. We love too fiercely. We mourn too deeply. And when we grieve, we remember. But when you take our children, when you rewrite our pain into protocol, we become something worse than unpredictable." He paused, let his eyes meet every delegate. "We become necessary fear." There were no objections, no retorts, only the rustle of robes and the distant hum of the Council's dying authority. 1 year later, Earth stood alone, not isolated, but sovereign. No longer a subject of the Galactic Council, it formed the Celestial Accord, a coalition of former victims and quiet rebels, bound by one iron vow: never again. In his quarters aboard the Accord's flagship Solstice, Grant watched an old hologram. Ava's face captured mid-laugh, her freckles blurred by static. The image had degraded over time. The memory had not. "We didn't want this," he said to no one. "But you made us gods." Outside his window, the stars no longer looked like indifferent lights in the dark. They looked like witnesses,